Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com. Today I have a shaker card that features one of the new Valentine images from Gerda Steiner Designs called Kitten in Heart. This particular image really screamed out to me to be turned into a shaker card, and so I'll be sharing that with you today. This video is a little bit longer as I explain the process of creating a shaker card, as it has quite a few steps. But I wanted to start off with some masking. I've been asked about digital stamp masking, and to me the easiest thing to do is to print out several of the image all in the same size. Then you can fussy cut out one of the images to create a mask. So that's what I did here. I cut out the heart, and I'm going to be using some repositionable adhesive to place it on top of the other image and then add a little bit of distress ink around it. If you weren't up for the masking, you could just take the distress ink and bring it from the sides as close to the digital image as you felt comfortable, and then just kind of leave the halo around it, which you've seen me do many times in previous videos. But for this image, I wanted to get it right on the line, especially because it was so simple to cut out this heart image and create a mask. I'm using some Seedless Preserves Distress ink and just rubbing it all over the card, then pulling it out from the center to create more of a dark color around the heart. When I wasn't quite achieving as much of a contrast as I wanted, I went in with the slightly darker Dusty Concord, and I'm only rubbing that out from the inside and just getting the right around the heart a little bit, not pulling that color out too far so that it would remain two-toned. I'll place my foams back underneath my distress inks, and then I'm ready to do some coloring. I'll rub off the repositionable adhesive. It comes off quite easily, but do make sure that your fingers aren't inky from the distress ink so you don't spread that about. I'm using the RV09 marker just to add some really simple coloring around the heart, not doing any shading there. I just want to add a little bit of pink and present a contrast between the purple and the pink as I cut out the shaker window in the center. I'm going to be coloring this cat on the main image just in a solid color of gray, because I will actually be layering another cat on top of it for some added dimension. And so I'll use my detail coloring in the other image of the cat and then just do a solid color in the one that has the purple masking on it. For the cat, I'm using the warm grays. As I've mentioned before, I really like to use the warm colors when coloring animals, when I'm using gray with animals as opposed to the cool tones. And I'm using a little bit of W7 as my darkest, W5 for a little bit lighter, and then finally blending out to W3. I did want there to be a little bit more of a darker edge on the bottom of the cat as opposed to the top, because there should be some shadow caused by him hanging over the lip of that heart, and so I wanted to present that shadow. I'm also coloring in the paws with the W markers, but again going with some lighter markers just so that they don't blend in too much. I'll just add a little touch of pink for his nose, and that will be it. Because you're not going to see most of this cat image, I'm just going to take the W5 and cover it completely. I had thought about going in with just the W3, you might have saw there, and I decided that it wasn't quite dark enough, and it made more sense to go with the tone that most of the cat was, and so I'm just going to be doing some quick coloring. I in fact don't even really have to worry about coloring in the lines up top there, because I will be cutting that out to create the shaker area behind the cat. So in order to create the shaker, I need some foam. In the past, I've used foam tape, and it's driven me nuts because things catch in the foam tape or you can't cover things completely, so I've switched to using some foam. I've seen this done by Jennifer McGuire and others, and I find that it's a great idea and a great suggestion. And so here I'm just using some really thin foam from the Dollar Tree. Any foam will do. A thicker foam you might have to use less, because I'm actually using 2 sheets here, but it's what I had on hand. And so I cut it out with the same die that I cut the main image panel out, which was the MFT stitched square die. After cutting them out, I did want to trim them up a little bit because I don't want it to quite poke out the sides, whereas if they were exactly the same size, you'd see it on the edges, and so I just trimmed that up a little bit. Now I need to get the heart shape, and so I'm first going to start by cutting out the heart from the colored panel. And once I have it fussy cut out, I will be able to then trace around it and create the foam pieces to be the right size. It does take a little bit of patience to cut around that cat without ripping anything, but it isn't too difficult since most of the cutting is just the main heart image. Once I have that fussy cut out, I'm ready to trace the shape onto the stencil. Now, I actually just have to cut out the heart because the area behind the cat doesn't need to be popped up with foam, and I actually think it would be better if it wasn't. And so I'm just getting a basic outline shape here, but I know that I can continue to fuss with it and trim it with my scissors until I create the effect that I'm going for. Basically, you want the window that's in your foam to be slightly larger than the window that is in your cardstock piece. Just like you want the foam to be slightly smaller than your main piece because you don't want to be able to see the foam from the insides or from the outsides. You kind of want it to be hidden like you would traditionally with foam tape. But it is a little bit more tricky and a little more time consuming than just laying down foam tape towards the edges, but I think that in the end it gives a much better look because you can really make sure that you seal it in, and in the end I'm going to use some really small beads, and even though I've shaken it around a lot, none of the beads are coming out because I've created this really solid foam panel as opposed to foam tape, which will let all those kinds of things leak out. Or, leak out's not the best word for it, but they'll start kind of coming out the sides, and I don't want to create a mess. I find that multimedia matte works really well as an adhesive for foam. I know that tacky glue works pretty well, and that's what I've used in the past, but since I keep multimedia matte right on my desk at all times, I decided to use that to glue the foam together. However, it's not effective for gluing the foam to the cardstock or gluing the plastic to the cardstock. Sorry, not the foam. You can glue the foam to the cardstock with the multimedia matte because it's meant to glue paper and to glue foam. But when you take the plastic sheet, you cannot glue that with a liquid adhesive. And I'll talk a little bit about that because I had a major mess up when I was actually creating the card. So I have a piece of acetate here. Mine is actually just from some packaging, but you can buy acetate sheets. I recommend just saving it because we all wind up with plenty of packaging, and there's no reason to invest in extra materials to create a couple of shaker cards. So as I said before, you don't want to use multimedia matte to adhere the plastic to anything because it won't stick. It's great for many things, but not at all for plastic. So I'm using a dry adhesive two-way tape in this situation. And I want to adhere this cardstock colored panel completely to the acetate sheet. And so even the cat will be glued directly on it. But then later I'll add dimension by popping up the other cat that you see up there in the top left that's colored and fussy cut out. After I lay it down, I'm just going to trim it up a little bit. Again, this is a case where you don't want the acetate to be the same exact size. You want everything to be just a touch smaller so it creates a more finished look in the end. And so then I can layer that on top of the foam panel. I had made the mistake of trying to use the multimedia matte and wind up having to go back and change it later. But once you get the foam adhered to the plastic acetate sheet, you're ready to add your shaker bits. As I mentioned before, I'm adding some seed beads, and these are from Ranger. You can basically use anything you have on hand. I just happened to use these because I got them at the Ranger sale, and they have like some shiny gold pieces and also like in the bead form, but then also as kind of sequins. And then because I'm already using pink in the outer edge of the card, I added in some small pink sequins as well. Then I'll take a little bit more of the multimedia matte and I can glue on the back panel, which is again just cut with the same die that I cut the original panel with. Once it's adhered and dried, I'm actually going to wind up trimming that panel a little bit. Because as you notice here, the white edges stick out somewhat, and that's not the look that I'm going for today. I do have a little bit of a mess on my table in terms of spilling the beads about, but once they're inside the shaker and it's glued down, it stays really well. As mentioned before, I'm adding that colored cat, the one with the detailed coloring, on top, just to give it a little bit more dimension. I already know that this card cannot go through the mail because of the thickness of the shaker, and so I'm just willing to go all out and add as much dimension as I would like today. So as you see, I trimmed the white panel that I glued the shaker down onto so that nothing sticks out and distracts from the shaker aspect. Then, because I'd spent so much time on the shaker and I really wanted to be the star of the show, I'm just going to layer it onto a piece of pattern paper, cut with the stitched rectangle die just because of the stitched panel, the stitched square that I started with, and then layering it onto some purple cardstock to pull the purple back in. And that's it for my card today. I hope you found this helpful and it's given you some tips to use with shakers, since this is my first successful shaker card ever. I've had some trouble in the past. And again, this is the image Kitten in Heart from Gerda Steiner. I'll leave links to the products in the video description below. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in seeing more crafty videos, including how to color digital stamps, you can subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.